The crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead like 1,000 tiny stars. Rebecca wiped down another table, careful not to let her white serving glove brush against the expensive silk tablecloths. Saturday nights at the Grandview Hotel were always like this. Rich people, expensive jewelry, conversations about vacation homes and stock portfolios that she couldn't begin to understand. She'd been working here for 3 years now. 28 years old and still serving drinks to people who probably spent more on a single dinner than she made in a month. But the tips were decent and the job was stable. That was more than she could say for most things in her life these days. Tonight was the annual charity gala. The tickets cost $500 each, which seemed insane to Rebecca. Who paid that much money just to eat tiny portions of fancy food and listen to some live music? But here they were, 200 guests dressed in designer gowns and tuxedos, laughing politely and sipping champagne that cost more per bottle than her weekly rent. Rebecca moved through the crowd with practiced ease. She'd learned how to become invisible in rooms like this, how to refill a glass without interrupting a conversation, how to clear a plate without being noticed. It was strange, really. In her real life, she'd always wanted to be seen, to be heard. But in this ballroom, being invisible was the whole point. She caught a glimpse of herself in one of the tall mirrors along the wall. Plain black uniform, hair pulled back in a tight bun, a small name tag that read Rebecca pinned to her vest. Nothing special. Nothing that would make anyone look twice. The dinner service was winding down now. Guests were finishing their desserts and moving toward the main seating area, where rows of chairs faced a small stage. A gorgeous grand piano sat in the spotlight, its black surface polished to perfection. Rebecca felt a familiar tightness in her chest when she looked at it. She quickly turned away and headed back to the kitchen with her tray of empty plates. In the kitchen, the other servers were gossiping about tonight's performer. Victor Ashford, some famous pianist who'd played at concert halls all over the world. Rebecca had heard of him, of course. Everyone in the classical music world knew his name. She tried not to think about that world anymore. It belonged to a different version of herself. A version that no longer existed. "Hey, Rebecca, can you grab those champagne bottles from the back?" called out Miguel, one of the bartenders. "Sure thing," she replied, grateful for something to keep her busy. But as she returned with the bottles, she noticed something was wrong. The event coordinator, Mrs. Patterson, was rushing around with her phone pressed to her ear. Her face had gone pale. Other staff members were whispering urgently to each other. "What's going on?" Rebecca asked another server. "The pianist," the girl whispered back. "He's not coming. Car accident or something. Nobody's hurt, but he can't make it in time." Rebecca's stomach dropped. She looked out at the audience settling into their seats. They had no idea. They were expecting world-class entertainment. They'd paid good money for it. Mrs. Patterson was now frantically scrolling through her phone, making call after call. Rebecca could hear snippets of the conversations. Every pianist in the city was already booked. It was Saturday night. Nobody was available on such short notice. "This is a disaster," Mrs. Patterson muttered to her assistant. "An absolute disaster. What are we supposed to tell them?" "Sorry. No entertainment tonight, but thanks for the $500. Rebecca stood there, her heart pounding in her chest. Her palms started to sweat inside her gloves. She knew she could help. She knew exactly what to do. But the thought of stepping forward, of revealing something she'd kept hidden for so long, terrified her. For almost 5 years, she hadn't touched a piano. Not once. She'd walked past music stores with her eyes down, changed the radio station when classical music came on, built a wall between herself and that part of her life. It was easier that way, less painful. But now, watching Mrs. Patterson panic, watching the staff scramble for solutions that didn't exist, something stirred inside her. That old feeling, the one that used to wake her up at 5 in the morning to practice, the one that made her fingers itch to move across keys. She thought about her mother in the nursing home across town, about the medical bills that never seemed to stop coming, about the dreams she'd had to put aside because life had gotten in the way. She thought about the conservatory, about being so close to everything she'd ever wanted only to have it all slip away. The guests were getting restless now. Rebecca could see them checking their watches, whispering to each other. Some were starting to stand up, clearly annoyed, before she could talk herself out of it. Rebecca set down her tray and walked toward Mrs. Patterson. "Excuse me," she said quietly. Mrs. Patterson barely glanced at her. "Not now, Rebecca. I'm dealing with a crisis. I know. That's why I'm here. I can play." Mrs. Patterson looked at her like she'd just spoken in a foreign language. "What? The piano. I can play it. I can fill in for the performer." For a moment, Mrs. Patterson just stared at her. Then she let out a short, stressed laugh. "Rebecca, this isn't the time for jokes. I need to figure out what to tell these people." "I'm not joking," Rebecca said, her voice steadier now. "I trained for 15 years. I was at the Riverside Conservatory. I can do this." Mrs. Patterson's expression shifted from disbelief to something else. Desperation, maybe. She looked at Rebecca's uniform, at her name tag, at her plain appearance. Rebecca could practically see the thoughts running through her mind. This was crazy. This was ridiculous. But what other choice did she have? "You're serious?" Mrs. Patterson asked, completely serious, a long pause. The assistant coordinator leaned in and whispered something. Mrs. Patterson bit her lip, clearly wrestling with the decision. "Fine," she finally said. 20 minutes. You play for 20 minutes while I keep trying to find a replacement." "Can you do that?" Rebecca nodded, not trusting her voice. "Okay, go, now, before they start leaving." Rebecca's legs felt shaky as she walked toward the stage. She could hear the murmur of the crowd growing louder. As she stepped into the spotlight, still wearing her server's uniform with her name tag visible, the murmuring turned into shocked whispers. She could see the confused looks on people's faces. A few guests actually laughed. One woman in a diamond necklace leaned over to her husband and said something that made him smirk. Rebecca felt her cheeks burn, but she kept walking. Step by step, closer to the piano, closer to the part of herself she'd locked away. When she finally sat down on the bench, her hands were trembling. She looked at the keys, those familiar black and white patterns that had once been her entire world. Could she really do this? After all this time? She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The keys felt cool under Rebecca's fingertips. For a moment, she just sat there, her hands resting on them without pressing down. 5 years. It had been 5 years since she'd last done this. 5 years since she'd walked away from everything she loved. The ballroom was quiet now, but it wasn't a respectful quiet. It was the kind of silence that comes before people start talking again, before they dismiss you completely. Rebecca could feel hundreds of eyes on her back. She could practically hear their thoughts. Who does this waitress think she is? Her mind flashed back to a different time. She was 7 years old, sitting at her grandmother's old upright piano. The keys were yellowed and some of them stuck, but to her, it was the most beautiful instrument in the world. Her grandmother had taught her the first simple melody, and Rebecca had played it over and over until her fingers ached. By the time she was 10, her parents had scraped together enough money for proper lessons. Mrs. Chen, her first real teacher, had told them that Rebecca had something special. Not just talent, but passion, the kind that couldn't be taught. The years that followed were a blur of practice rooms and recitals. While other kids were at the mall or watching TV, Rebecca was working through scales and studying composers. She didn't mind. The piano wasn't just what she did. It was who she was. At 16, she'd auditioned for the Riverside Conservatory and gotten in with a partial scholarship. It was one of the best music schools in the country. Her parents had been so proud they'd cried. Rebecca remembered her mother holding her face in both hands, saying, "You're going to be something special, baby." I just know it. The conservatory years were intense. 8 hours of practice every day, theory classes, performance workshops, competition after competition. But Rebecca thrived on it. She was finally surrounded by people who understood, people who spoke the language of music the way she did. By her senior year, she'd started to make a name for herself. Small performances at first, then bigger ones. A professor had helped her secure an audition slot at Carnegie Hall. It was scheduled for 3 months after graduation. 3 months, that's all she'd needed. Then everything fell apart. Her mother got sick, really sick. The kind of sick that empties bank accounts and breaks families. The medical bills started piling up faster than her father could pay them. Rebecca had tried to keep going, tried to balance everything, but it was impossible. Someone had to help. Someone had to step up. She'd withdrawn from the conservatory 2 months before graduation. Canceled the Carnegie Hall audition. Taken the first job she could find that paid decent money. At first, she'd told herself it was temporary, just until her mother got better, just until things stabilized, but things never stabilized. Her mother's condition improved, but she needed full-time care. The debt was crushing, and somewhere along the way, Rebecca had stopped believing she could go back. The piano became a reminder of everything she'd lost. It was easier not to think about it at all. Now here she was, sitting at a piano again, in front of 200 wealthy strangers who were already judging her, who were already deciding she wasn't good enough. Rebecca opened her eyes and looked down at the keys. Her hands were still shaking slightly. She took another breath, deeper this time. Then she started to play. The piece was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. She'd played it 1,000 times, maybe 10,000. It was one of the first advanced pieces she'd ever learned, and it had always been her favorite. Delicate, emotional, honest. The first notes floated out into the ballroom, soft and gentle. Rebecca's fingers remembered exactly where to go even after all this time. It was like meeting an old friend, someone you hadn't seen in years but who still knew all your secrets. The trembling in her hands stopped. Her shoulders relaxed. She forgot about the uniform she was wearing, forgot about the name tag, forgot about the people watching her. There was only the music. She could feel it happening. That thing that used to happen when she played, where the notes stopped being separate sounds and became something bigger. A story, a conversation, a feeling that couldn't be put into words. The chattering in the ballroom had completely stopped now. Rebecca didn't notice. She was somewhere else entirely. Her body swayed gently with the music, following the rhythm like it was breathing. The Chopin piece ended with a soft, fading note. Without pausing, Rebecca transitioned into Debussy, Clair de Lune, another piece she knew by heart. The notes sparkled and shimmered like moonlight on water. In the audience, people had stopped checking their phones. The woman in the diamond necklace who had smirked earlier sat frozen, her champagne glass halfway to her lips. A man in the third row leaned forward in his seat, his eyes wide. Mrs. Patterson stood at the side of the stage, her mouth slightly open. She'd expected Rebecca to play a few simple songs, maybe some basic classical pieces. Nothing like this. Rebecca moved through the Debussy like she was painting with sound. Every note had a purpose. Every phrase told part of the story. This wasn't just technical skill. This was artistry. She flowed into Rachmaninoff next, Prelude in G minor. The mood shifted, more intense, more passionate. Her fingers flew across the keys with impossible speed and precision. The difficulty level had just jumped significantly, but Rebecca handled it like it was the easiest thing in the world. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Nobody made a move to stop her. Mrs. Patterson had completely forgotten about finding a replacement pianist. She was just standing there watching like everyone else. In the back of the ballroom, a man in his 60s leaned over to his wife. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. "That's not just good. That's extraordinary." His wife nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I haven't heard playing like that in years." The man was Thomas Brennan, one of the most respected music critics in the country. He'd come to the gala as a favor to a friend, expecting a boring evening of predictable entertainment. Instead, he was witnessing something he'd remember for the rest of his life. He pulled out his phone and started typing notes. There was something familiar about this woman's name. Rebecca something. He'd heard it before years ago. A young prodigy who'd been making waves in the classical music scene. Then she'd just disappeared. Could this be the same person, serving drinks at a hotel charity gala? Rebecca finished the Rachmaninoff and moved into another piece. She'd lost track of time completely. All those years of silence, all that stored-up emotion, it was pouring out of her now through the piano. She couldn't have stopped if she'd wanted to. The music filled every corner of the ballroom. It wrapped around the guests like a warm blanket. Some people had tears streaming down their faces. Others just sat perfectly still, afraid that moving might break the spell. This wasn't supposed to happen. A waitress wasn't supposed to play like this. Someone in a plain uniform with a plastic name tag wasn't supposed to move 200 wealthy, cultured people to tears. But sometimes life surprises you. Sometimes the person you overlook, the one you don't even see, turns out to be exactly what you needed all along. Rebecca played on, finally allowing herself to remember who she really was. Rebecca played the final chord and let it hang in the air. The note faded slowly, echoing through the silent ballroom. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The silence was so complete you could have heard a pin drop. Then the applause started. It wasn't polite golf clapping. It wasn't the kind of applause people give because they're supposed to. This was something different. It started with one person standing up, then another. Then suddenly the entire ballroom was on its feet. The sound was deafening. Rebecca blinked, coming back to herself. She looked out at the audience and felt a jolt of shock. They were standing. All of them. Clapping so hard their hands must have hurt. Some people were wiping their eyes. Others were shouting, "Bravo!" She'd forgotten they were there. For those 45 minutes, it had just been her and the music. Now reality came crashing back. She was still wearing her server's uniform, still had her name tag pinned to her chest. She was supposed to be clearing tables and refilling drinks, not sitting at a $20,000 piano, making rich people cry. The standing ovation went on and on. 3 minutes, 4, 5. Rebecca stood up from the bench, not sure what to do with her hands. She gave a small, awkward bow. The applause got even louder. Mrs. Patterson rushed onto the stage, her face a mixture of shock and something close to awe. She grabbed Rebecca's hand and held it up like a boxing referee declaring a winner. The crowd loved it. As Rebecca stepped off the stage, people swarmed toward her. Suddenly she wasn't invisible anymore. Everyone wanted to talk to her, to shake her hand, to know who she was. That was incredible, a woman in a silver dress gushed. "Where have you been performing? I must see you again." "I've never heard anything like that," a man in an expensive suit added. "Do you have recordings?" "A website?" Rebecca opened her mouth but couldn't find words. What was she supposed to say? "Actually, I just serve drinks here. This is my first time touching a piano in 5 years. No, I don't have recordings. I gave all that up to pay my mother's medical bills." A hand touched her elbow. She turned to see an older man with kind eyes and silver hair. He looked distinguished in a way that came from actual accomplishment, not just money. "Miss Peterson," he said, reading her name tag. "I'm Thomas Brennan. I write for Classical Music Review." Rebecca's heart skipped. She knew that name. Everyone in the classical music world knew that name. Thomas Brennan had been reviewing performances for 30 years. A good review from him could make a career. A bad one could end it. "I thought I recognized the name," he continued. "You were at Riverside Conservatory, weren't you?" "About 5 years ago. I heard you perform at a student showcase once. You were extraordinary then, but tonight..." He shook his head in amazement. Tonight was something else entirely. Rebecca felt her throat tighten. "You remember me?" "Of course I remember. You were supposed to play at Carnegie Hall. Everyone was talking about you. Then you just vanished." "What happened?" The question hung between them. Rebecca looked down at her scuffed work shoes. "Life happened," she said quietly. "My mom got sick. Someone had to take care of her. Someone had to pay the bills." Thomas nodded slowly. Understanding crossed his face. He'd been in this business long enough to see talented people disappear for all kinds of reasons. Money, family, health. The music world was full of almost stories. "I'm sorry," he said. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was what needed to be done," Rebecca replied. Her voice steady, even though her hands were shaking again. More people were trying to get her attention, but Thomas held up a hand to hold them off. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice. "I want to write about you. About tonight. But more importantly, I want to help. I know people. I know programs. There might be ways to get you back into this world if that's what you want." Before Rebecca could respond, another man pushed through the crowd. He was younger, maybe 40, with an energetic presence that filled the space around him. Excuse me, he said, slightly out of breath. "Miss, I'm David Chen. I run the West Side Academy of Music. I heard you play, and I have to ask, would you consider teaching for us? We have some incredibly talented students who need someone who understands music the way you do. We can offer you a position and full access to our practice facilities. You could play every day if you wanted." Rebecca stared at him. "Teaching?" "Yes, we've been looking for someone special. Someone who can really inspire our advanced students. And you?" He gestured toward the piano. "You're exactly what we need." A woman in an elegant black gown stepped forward next. She looked to be in her 70s with perfect posture and intelligent eyes. "Young lady," she said in a crisp voice, "I'm Helen Whitmore. My late husband was a concert violinist. I run a foundation that supports classical musicians. What you did tonight reminded me why we started that foundation in the first place. I'd like to discuss sponsoring your return to performing. Rebecca felt dizzy. This was too much. An hour ago, she'd been clearing dessert plates. Now a music critic wanted to write about her. An academy director was offering her a teaching job, and a wealthy donor wanted to sponsor her career. I don't understand, she said. I'm just a waitress. No, Thomas said firmly. You're a pianist who's been working as a waitress. There's a big difference, Helen nodded in agreement. Talent like yours doesn't disappear just because circumstances change. It's been there all along, waiting. Mrs. Patterson appeared at Rebecca's side, looking apologetic. Rebecca, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. If I'd known you could play like that, I would never have. It's okay, Rebecca said. She meant it. If Mrs. Patterson had known, she probably never would have let her play. Sometimes opportunities only come when nobody expects them. The crowd around her was still growing. People wanted pictures. They wanted to exchange contact information. A few asked if she was available for private events. One couple wanted to hire her to play at their daughter's wedding. Rebecca's mind was spinning. She caught sight of Miguel, the bartender, standing at the edge of the crowd with his mouth hanging open. The other servers were clustered nearby, looking at her like she'd just stepped out of a spaceship. She'd worked with these people for 3 years, shared cigarette breaks, and complained about difficult customers. They'd known her as Rebecca, the quiet waitress who never talked about her past. Now they were seeing someone completely different, or maybe they were finally seeing who she really was. The gala coordinator approached with a check. Miss Peterson, I hope you'll accept this. It's what we would have paid the original performer. You more than earned it. Rebecca looked at the number and felt tears sting her eyes. It was more than she made in 2 months of waitressing. As the crowd finally began to thin out, Rebecca found a quiet corner and sat down. Her legs felt weak. Her heart was still racing. She pulled out her phone and stared at it for a long moment before dialing. Mom, she said when the nurse put her through. I need to tell you something. I played piano tonight. For the first time in 5 years, I actually played. And Mom, I think everything's about to change. The nursing home smelled like antiseptic and overcooked vegetables, the same as it always did. Rebecca walked down the familiar hallway, her footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. It was Sunday afternoon, the day after the gala, and she still felt like she was floating. Her mother was in the common room, sitting by the window in her wheelchair. At 62, Linda Peterson looked older than she should. The illness had taken a lot from her. But when she saw Rebecca, her face lit up with the same warm smile that had gotten Rebecca through every difficult moment of her childhood. There's my girl, Linda said as Rebecca bent down to hug her. Hi, Mom. Rebecca pulled up a chair and sat close. She'd been thinking all night about what to say, how to explain what had happened. Finally, she just started talking. She told her mother everything. About the missing pianist, about stepping forward even though she was terrified, about playing for the first time in 5 years, about the standing ovation and the people who'd surrounded her afterward with opportunities she'd thought were gone forever. Linda listened quietly, her eyes getting misty. When Rebecca finished, her mother reached out and took her hand. I knew this would happen someday, Linda said softly. You did? Baby, you can't hide a gift like yours. I knew eventually the world would find you again. She squeezed Rebecca's hand. I just wish it hadn't taken so long. Rebecca felt the familiar knot of guilt tighten in her chest. Mom, I had to take care of you. There wasn't another choice. There's always a choice, Linda said firmly. And the choice you made broke my heart. Rebecca looked at her in surprise. Her mother had never said this before. Do you think I wanted you to give up everything for me? Linda continued. Do you think that made me feel good, watching you work yourself to death? Knowing it was because of my medical bills? Tears rolled down her cheeks. Rebecca, you were weeks away from Carnegie Hall, weeks, and you threw it all away. I didn't throw it away. I chose you. And that choice has haunted me every single day. Linda's voice cracked. You think I don't see it in your eyes? The sadness, the loss. You walk around pretending you're fine, but you're not fine. You haven't been fine in 5 years. Rebecca felt her own tears coming. What was I supposed to do? Let you lose everything? Yes, Linda said more forcefully than Rebecca had heard her speak in years. Your father and I are adults. We would have figured it out. We would have sold the house, filed for bankruptcy, whatever it took. But your music? That was sacred. That was yours. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside the window, an old man was feeding birds in the garden. I'm sorry, Linda finally said. I should have told you this years ago. Should have made you go back. But I was sick and scared and selfish. I let you sacrifice yourself because it was easier than facing everything alone. Mom, stop. You're not selfish. Maybe not, but I wasn't brave enough to make you leave. And now, Linda wiped her eyes, now you finally get a second chance. And Rebecca, I'm begging you, please don't waste it. Not this time. Rebecca hugged her mother tightly. They both cried, releasing 5 years of unspoken grief and regret. When Rebecca finally left the nursing home an hour later, something felt different. Lighter. Like a weight she'd been carrying had finally been set down. Over the next few weeks, her life transformed in ways she couldn't have imagined. Thomas Brennan published his article in Classical Music Review. The headline read, "The Waitress Who Stopped the Show, A Prodigy Returns." It was beautiful and honest, telling her story without making her seem like a victim or a hero. Just a talented person who'd faced impossible choices and found her way back. The article went viral, not just in music circles but everywhere. News outlets picked it up. Social media exploded. Suddenly everyone wanted to know about the Waitress pianist. Rebecca's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Interview requests, performance opportunities, more teaching offers. It was overwhelming and exciting and terrifying all at once. She met with Helen Whitmore, the foundation director, at a quiet cafe downtown. Helen was all business, but there was genuine kindness in her eyes. Here's what I'm proposing, Helen said, sliding a folder across the table. The Whitmore Foundation will cover your mother's care facility costs for the next 2 years. We'll also provide a monthly stipend so you can focus on music without worrying about basic expenses. Rebecca stared at the papers. Why would you do this? You don't even know me. I know your music, Helen replied, and I know what it's like to love someone so much you'd give up everything for them. My husband had cancer. For 3 years I watched him fade away while trying to keep his spirit alive through music. I understand sacrifice, she paused. But I also understand that talent like yours is rare. The world needs beautiful things, Rebecca. Especially now. And you have the ability to create beauty. That matters. Rebecca signed the papers with shaking hands. When she walked out of that cafe, she felt like she was breathing properly for the first time in years. The teaching position at Westside Academy started a week later. David Chen showed her around the facility, introducing her to staff and students. The practice rooms were beautiful, each one soundproofed and equipped with quality instruments. You can use any of these rooms whenever you want, David said. Consider this your second home. Her first student was a 15-year-old girl named Katie, who played with technical precision but no emotion. She reminded Rebecca of some of her conservatory classmates who'd treated music like a math problem to solve. After listening to Katie play, Rebecca sat down beside her at the piano. That was perfect, Rebecca said. Every note was exactly right. But let me ask you something. Why do you play? Katie looked confused. What do you mean? Why piano? Why music? What makes you want to do this? The girl thought for a moment. My parents want me to get into a good college. Piano looks good on applications, Rebecca nodded slowly. Okay, but what do you want? Katie didn't have an answer. Here's what I learned, Rebecca said. You can play all the right notes and still say nothing. Music isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest. It's about taking everything you feel and turning it into sound. She demonstrated, playing a simple melody but infusing it with emotion. Hear the difference? Katie's eyes widened. Yeah, I do. Good, now you try. Don't think about the notes. Think about something that matters to you, something real. Over the next hour, Rebecca watched Katie transform. The girl started playing the same piece she'd played before, but this time it actually meant something. You could hear it in every phrase. When the lesson ended, Katie looked at Rebecca with tears in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Nobody ever taught me that before. Rebecca smiled. You're welcome. Walking home that evening, Rebecca realized something important. She wasn't just getting her own life back. She was helping other people find theirs too. Maybe that's what all of this had been about. All the struggle, all the sacrifice, all the pain. Maybe it had shaped her into someone who could actually teach. Who could understand what it meant to lose something precious and fight to get it back? Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Patterson at the hotel. The gala raised double what we expected. Board wants you to perform at next year's event. Will you do it? Rebecca typed back without hesitation. Absolutely. She looked up at the sky. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and pink. For the first time in 5 years, Rebecca felt like she knew who she was again, and it felt like coming home. 3 months had passed since that night at the Grandview Hotel. Rebecca stood backstage at the Riverside Concert Hall, the same venue where she'd performed as a student years ago, but tonight was different. Tonight wasn't a student showcase or a competition. This was her comeback performance, her return to the world she'd left behind. She could hear the audience filing in, the murmur of voices and shuffling of feet. The hall wasn't huge, maybe 300 seats, but every single one was sold out. When the tickets went on sale, they disappeared in less than an hour. Rebecca looked at herself in the dressing room mirror. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but not flashy. Her hair was down for once, not pulled back in the tight bun she'd worn at the hotel. She looked like herself. Not a waitress. Not a prodigy. Just herself. There was a knock at the door. 5 minutes, Miss Peterson, 5 minutes. Rebecca took a deep breath. Her hands weren't shaking this time. She felt ready. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind. Teaching at the academy had become the anchor of her new routine. She had 12 students now, all at different levels, all with their own stories and struggles. Working with them had reminded her why music mattered in the first place. It wasn't about perfection or fame. It was about connection, about expressing things that couldn't be said with words. The foundation money had changed everything. Her mother's medical bills were covered. Rebecca had been able to move into a small apartment with an upright piano in the living room. Nothing fancy, but it was hers. And every morning she woke up and played, making up for all those years of silence. She'd given her notice at the Grandview Hotel, though it hadn't been easy. Miguel and the other servers had thrown her a goodbye party in the break room. Mrs. Patterson had cried and told her she'd always have a job there if she needed one. You taught me something important, Mrs. Patterson had said. Never assume you know someone's story just by looking at them. Rebecca had hugged her tight. Thank you for taking a chance on me that night. Even though you thought I was crazy. You were crazy, Mrs. Patterson laughed through her tears. But sometimes crazy is exactly what we need. Now, standing backstage at the concert hall, Rebecca thought about all the people who'd helped her get here. Thomas, who'd written about her with such honesty and respect. Helen, who'd given her the freedom to pursue music again. David, who'd trusted her with his students. Her mother, who'd finally told her the truth about sacrifice and love. And she thought about all the people who'd be in the audience tonight. Not billionaires or celebrities, just regular people who loved music. Students from the academy, nurses from her mother's facility, a few of her former co-workers from the hotel, her father who'd driven 6 hours to be here, and her mother, who'd insisted on coming despite her condition. Rebecca had arranged for a wheelchair-accessible seat in the front row. 2 minutes. Rebecca walked to the stage entrance and peeked through the curtain. The seats were full. She spotted her mother right away, sitting in her wheelchair with Rebecca's father beside her. Her mother was wearing her favorite blue dress, the one she saved for special occasions. Even from backstage, Rebecca could see the pride on her face. The house lights dimmed. The audience fell silent. Rebecca walked onto the stage. The applause was warm and welcoming. She saw Thomas Brennan in the third row, notebook already out. She saw Katie, her student, sitting with her parents and grinning so wide it looked like her face might split. She saw Miguel waving enthusiastically from the back. But mostly she saw her mother, tears already streaming down her face. Rebecca sat at the piano and adjusted the bench. This instrument was different from the one at the hotel. It had its own personality, its own voice. She placed her hands on the keys and felt that familiar sense of rightness. This was where she belonged. She'd chosen her program carefully. Not the flashiest pieces or the most difficult. Instead, she'd picked music that meant something to her. Music that told her story. She started with the same piece she'd played that night at the gala. Chopin's Nocturne. It felt right to begin where her return had begun. But this time she played it differently. With more confidence, more peace. The music filled the hall, wrapping around every person in the audience. Rebecca poured everything into it. The years of loss, the struggle, the guilt, the love for her mother, the fear of stepping forward, the joy of coming back. She moved through her program piece by piece, Debussy, Rachmaninoff, Beethoven, Schubert. Each one was a chapter in her story. Each one was a conversation with the audience, telling them things she could never say out loud. When she played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, she looked at her mother. This had been her mother's favorite piece when Rebecca was a child. Her mother would sit and listen to Rebecca practice it for hours, never getting tired of it. Now, playing it in this concert hall, Rebecca finally understood what her mother had tried to tell her at the nursing home. The sacrifice hadn't been wrong. The love hadn't been wrong. But holding on to the pain, punishing herself for choosing love, that had been the real mistake. Music and love weren't opposites. They were the same thing expressed differently. Her mother had taught her that, even if it took 5 years to understand it. The final piece of the evening was one Rebecca had composed herself. She'd written it over the past month, working on it late at night in her apartment. It didn't have a name yet. It didn't need one. It was simply everything she felt translated into sound. It started soft and sad, like remembering something lost. Then it grew stronger, more determined. There were moments of joy, moments of struggle, moments of quiet reflection, and at the end it resolved into something that wasn't quite happiness but was close. Peace, maybe, or acceptance, or hope. When the last note faded away, there was a long moment of silence. Then the audience erupted. They stood and clapped and cheered. Rebecca stood and bowed, tears running down her face. She looked at her mother, who was clapping as hard as she could despite her weak hands. Her father had his arm around her mother's shoulders, and he was crying too. Rebecca took another bow and then walked off stage. But the applause didn't stop. It went on and on. The stage manager gestured for her to go back out. She walked back to the piano and sat down. The audience gradually quieted. Rebecca knew she was supposed to leave, that the program was finished. But she had one more thing to say. She played a simple melody, one she'd learned from her grandmother on that old yellow-keyed piano 20 years ago. The first piece she'd ever learned. The one that had started everything. It was barely a minute long, but it was perfect. When she finished, she stood and spoke to the audience for the first time that night. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing me, for hearing me, for reminding me who I am." The applause started again, but Rebecca was already walking off stage toward her mother. Later that night, after the reception and the congratulations and the photos, Rebecca sat in her apartment at her little upright piano. She played quietly just for herself, like she did every night now. Her phone buzzed with a text from Katie. "You were amazing tonight. You showed me that it's okay to lose your way sometimes, as long as you find your way back." Rebecca smiled and set down her phone. She looked around her small apartment, at the piano that had become her best friend again, at the photos on the wall of her students, at the program from tonight's concert sitting on the table. This wasn't the life she'd imagined when she was 18 and dreaming of Carnegie Hall. It was smaller in some ways, quieter, but it was real. And it was hers, and somehow, that made it more valuable than any dream. She'd learned something important over these past few months. Success wasn't about being famous or wealthy or performing in the biggest venues. Success was about being brave enough to be yourself, about choosing love without losing yourself, about falling down and getting back up. Rebecca played one more song before bed. Nothing fancy, just a melody that came to her in the moment. And for the first time in 5 years, when she finally closed the piano and turned off the light, she felt complete. 6 months after her comeback performance, Rebecca stood in front of a room full of journalists and cameras. The press conference had been Helen Whitmore's idea, though Rebecca still wasn't sure she was comfortable with all the attention. "We're announcing something special today," Helen said from the podium. "The Whitmore Foundation is launching a new program called Second Chances. It's designed to support talented musicians who had to step away from their careers due to financial hardship or family obligations." The reporters scribbled notes. Cameras flashed. Rebecca sat on the stage behind Helen, trying not to look as nervous as she felt. "Rebecca Peterson's story touched millions of people," Helen continued. "But what many don't realize is that there are thousands of talented artists out there who face the same impossible choices she did. This program will provide financial support, mentorship, and performance opportunities to help them return to music. Helen turned and gestured to Rebecca. And Rebecca has agreed to serve as the program's first artistic director. More cameras flashed. Rebecca managed a small smile and waved. When Helen had first proposed this idea a month ago, Rebecca's immediate reaction had been panic. Her, running a program? She was still figuring out her own life. But then she'd thought about all the people like her. The talented musicians working checkout counters and waiting tables. The ones who'd given up their dreams because life demanded it. The ones who thought they'd never get another chance. If she could help even one person find their way back, it would be worth it. After the press conference, Rebecca escaped to a quiet corner. Her phone was already exploding with messages. Congratulations from friends, interview requests from media outlets, and one text that made her heart skip. It was from Professor Martinez, her old teacher at the conservatory. Rebecca, I saw the news. I'm so proud of you. Would you consider coming back to speak to our current students? They need to hear your story. Rebecca stared at the message for a long moment. The conservatory. She hadn't been back since the day she withdrew. The thought of walking through those halls again made her stomach twist, but she typed back, I'd be honored. 2 weeks later, Rebecca pulled into the conservatory parking lot. The building looked exactly the same. Red brick and tall windows. The garden where she used to practice her pieces while walking between classes. The bench where she'd sat and cried when her mother first got sick. Professor Martinez met her at the entrance. She was older now, her hair more gray than brown, but her eyes still had that sharp, knowing look. Rebecca, she said warmly, pulling her into a hug. It's been too long. I'm sorry I never came back. After I left, I just couldn't. I understand, Professor Martinez said gently. But you're here now. That's what matters. She led Rebecca through the familiar hallways. Students rushed past with instrument cases and sheet music. Rebecca could hear piano music drifting from the practice rooms, violins warming up, someone singing scales. It hit her harder than she expected. This used to be her whole world. These hallways had felt like home. The auditorium was packed. Every seat filled with students aged 16 to 25. They all looked so young to Rebecca now, though she was only 29. They looked hopeful and hungry and passionate, just like she'd been. Professor Martinez introduced her, listing her achievements both past and present. When Rebecca walked onto the stage, the applause was respectful but uncertain. These students didn't really know who she was. To them, she was just another guest speaker. Rebecca stood at the microphone and looked out at all those young faces. I'm not going to tell you that following your dreams is easy, she began, because that would be a lie. I'm not going to promise that if you work hard enough, everything will work out, because sometimes it doesn't. The students shifted in their seats. This wasn't the usual motivational speech. I was sitting where you are 8 years ago, Rebecca continued. I had a scholarship to this school. I practiced 8 hours a day. I won competitions. I had an audition scheduled at Carnegie Hall. Everything was going according to plan. And then life happened. She told them her story. Not the sanitized version from the news articles, but the real one. About the fear and the guilt. About working at the hotel and hiding who she really was. About the years she spent convinced she'd never play again. I gave up my dreams for my family, she said. And I don't regret that choice, but I do regret giving up on myself. I thought that choosing love meant abandoning music. I thought I had to pick one or the other. A girl in the front row raised her hand. So what changed? Rebecca smiled. I got lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. But more than that, I finally let myself be brave. Just for one moment, I stepped forward when everything in me wanted to stay invisible. She paused, looking around the room. Here's what I learned. Life is going to throw impossible situations at you. You might have to make choices you don't want to make. You might have to step away from music temporarily. And that's okay. What's not okay is convincing yourself that stepping away means giving up forever. Another student raised his hand. But what if we do have to give it up? What if we have to get a regular job and we never get a second chance? Then you find ways to keep music alive, Rebecca said firmly. You play for yourself. You teach neighborhood kids. You join a community orchestra. Music doesn't have to be your career to be part of your life. I lost 5 years because I made it all or nothing. Don't make the same mistake. She spent the next hour answering questions. Some were about technique and practice. Others were about dealing with pressure and self-doubt. One girl asked how Rebecca handled stage fright. A boy wanted to know if she ever questioned whether she was good enough. Every single day, Rebecca admitted. Even now, especially now, I look at real concert pianists, the ones who never stopped, and I wonder if I'll ever catch up. But then I remember that music isn't a competition. It's a conversation, and my voice matters just as much as anyone else's. After the talk, students lined up to speak with her one-on-one. A young woman with tears in her eyes told Rebecca that her father had cancer, and she was thinking of dropping out. A boy explained that he was the first person in his family to attend college, and the pressure was crushing him. Rebecca listened to each one. She didn't have magic answers or perfect solutions, but she could offer understanding. She could tell them they weren't alone. One girl hung back until everyone else had left. She looked about 19 with nervous energy and bitten fingernails. "Miss Peterson," she said quietly, "I don't know if I'm good enough for this. Everyone here is so talented and I feel like I'm just faking it." Rebecca recognized that feeling immediately. "Can I tell you something? The week before my comeback concert, I almost canceled it. I convinced myself I wasn't ready, that I'd forgotten too much, that everyone would see I was a fraud." The girl's eyes widened. "Really? But you're amazing." "I'm human," Rebecca said. "And so are you. The fact that you doubt yourself means you care. That's not weakness. That's what makes you an artist." The girl smiled, looking relieved. "Thank you. I really needed to hear that." As Rebecca walked back to her car later, Professor Martinez walked with her. "You were wonderful in there," the professor said. "You reached them in a way I never could. You gave them hope. I just told them the truth. That's exactly why it worked." Professor Martinez stopped and looked at Rebecca seriously. "I need to tell you something. When you left, I was angry. I felt like you'd wasted your potential, thrown away everything we'd worked for. But I was wrong. Your journey made you into someone who can actually help people. Not just play pretty music, but really help them." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. "That means more than you know. I'm proud of you, Rebecca. Not for coming back to music, for becoming the person you are." Driving home that evening, Rebecca thought about all those students, about their dreams and fears, about the paths their lives might take. Some would become professional musicians. Others would find different careers. Some might step away and come back just like she had, but they would remember today. They would remember that success wasn't a straight line, that it was okay to struggle, that coming back was always possible. When Rebecca got home, she sat at her piano and played. Not because she had to, not because anyone was listening, just because she wanted to. And in that moment, she realized something important. She'd spent so long chasing the dream of what music could give her: success, recognition, validation. But music had already given her the most important thing. It had given her back herself.